In this video, you'll be creating this extreme weather events tracker using Google Maps in React. So here is the map here. You can zoom in. As you can see, these are the individual icons, but also when the markers are close together, the weather events, we've got these, what they're called clusters here, and you can click on them to zoom in. And each level, it shows the different markers. And as you can see, you can click on these, see what they are, the wildfires. There's other events as well, like volcanoes, for example. So there's one in Iceland, near Reykjavik, the capital. So here it is. You can click on it to find out more information about it. The cool feature about this is not just the clusters, which other people's maps don't have, but it's also this search, which other people's maps don't have as well. So you can filter out by event type. So severe storms, well, there aren't any here, but there are some over here in the east, around Indonesia, and also somewhere in the sea. So it's not really. So yeah, it's a cyclone. And yeah, so you can filter out like that. And also, yeah, if you're wondering where these are what in the Antarctica, by the way. So I hear the clusters here. Yeah, there's not much you can say about that really. Yeah, so you can just filter. So like if we want to find out what the events are in Italy, we can just search in Italy. There's one wildfire and there are 2 volcanoes. So where is the wildfire? We can click on it. It takes us to the location in Italy. So it's in North Italy, almost on the Swiss border actually. And obviously same for the volcanoes. If we say, oh, severe storms, okay, there's no results here. And same is true for, just if we typed in, I don't know, England, see there's no results, so we just type whatever, no results, so that's all working correctly as it should. And what else can we say? This data, by the way, it's real time, it didn't come from me, it came from the actual NASA API, which you'll be learning how to use. And if this interests you, then keep watching and find out how to create it. Okay, so I've just set up a new React project using Create React App, and I've made sure that I've installed Yarn before I've created the project. If you haven't installed Yarn, then you'll need to go to your terminal before you create the React project and say npm I yarn and use the global flag to install it globally, so for all projects. The reason why we are using Yarn is because one of the dependencies is only able to be installed using Yarn. And now that we mentioned the dependencies, there are a lot of dependencies that we'll need to use in this project. The first one is this iconify dependency, which will give us access to icons that we'll be using. Now before we install the main one, which is the emoji1 icons, we'll need to install the actual iconify React dependency, which will give us access to all of the icon subdependencies that it contains. So we'll copy that. Actually, no, we won't. We'll copy the Yarn specific one since we created our project with Yarn, or to work with Yarn dependencies. So we'll install it like so. Again, link will be posted in the description for all of these websites that I'm using, just in case you can't find them on npm. And now once we've installed the main iconify dependency for React, we can install the specific emoji1 icon pack, which will give us access to the icons that we need. Okay, now I've finished with the emoji1 dependencies. We could install this .env dependency. This will be used to store our Google Map API key as an environment variable so other people can't view it. And actually, now that I mention it, for this project, we'll need to generate a Google Map API key so we can use their services. So we do this on Google Cloud Platform. As you can see, I've got one here already set up. So you'll need to set one up before you continue with this tutorial. And now we can install .env, so we'll copy that into our terminal. Once installed, we can move on to the next one, which is this use Supercluster Dependency. It gives us access to the clustering feature, which actually isn't built into the Google Map. So we'll copy it here. Again, this one's a bit hard to find because there are many alternatives and it's not really that well used. But again, link will be in the description if you can't find it. Okay, so now we've installed it, we can move on to the next one. And the actual dependency that we will be using to display the map in React is this Google Map React dependency. Now, again, there are alternatives for using a map in React, but this is the one that we will be using. So finally, we will install this as the final dependency. Okay, so we've installed all the dependencies. And what we'll actually do before we exit out this web browser, we'll go to Google Fonts, and then we'll say Open Sans. Again, link will be posted in the description, and we'll just get access to this regular font family here, and we'll copy that. We'll also get access to the bold weight, but for now we'll copy that. And we'll go to our React project, we'll go to public, go to the index file where the React gets rendered to, the React DOM, and in the head, actually we'll change the title, we'll say extreme weather event with an X to make it match with the header that we'll be creating shortly, and we'll say Google font, and we'll just copy that in there so we can use the Open Sans font. And we'll also copy this bold one, and then we'll copy the bottommost link there, which is the specific bold weight. There we go, pasted it in. And then now we will sort out our project. So we'll remove these two images. We'll remove this test, this logo. We'll remove those two tests, and we'll also remove the app.css file, like so. Once we've done all that, we'll need to clear out all of this in our app, because we don't need it anymore. And index, again, we'll have to delete this now because we deleted a lot of the files. So not index.css because we still have that, but we will remove this as well, like so. This is good. Now before we start with the main app, we're going to actually set up a global context which won't be used immediately in the project, but it will come in very useful later on. So we'll create a new folder in the source, and we will call it context. Inside we'll create the file context.js, and we will import both the useContext and the useState hook. So we'll import that now. Again, the functionality of this won't be immediately obvious, but trust me, it will be extremely useful later on. And we'll use React to create the main context, and we'll call it main context like so, because we won't be using the useContext hook for any other usage, so it's fine to call it that. And then we will export a named function called useMainContext, and what it will do, it will return this main context using the useContext hook. So we'll add it in like so. Now what this custom hook will do is it will allow children of the context provider to be able to access the context provider's value. So all they will need to do is import this custom hook, and then it will have access to the value stored within the main context provider. Now we haven't actually created the main context provider, so we'll do that in a different hook, which will, this is actually a functional component which will wrap our entire application, and we'll call it context provider in Pascal case, because it's a functional component. Have one property, the children, so the stuff wrapped inside the component. And what we will do, we will write out a comment first. We'll say all of the data from NASA EONET, which is an API that we'll be using, and then we'll say event data, set event data, and then we'll declare that to be an empty array in useState. So this will be assigned all of the data from the API when we make a GET request to it. Again, we won't do this at the moment, but we're just setting it up before we begin with the application, so that it's there and we don't have to hassle around. The next comment will say used to store the event that the user wants to go to. So this will be when the user clicks on a specific row from the table, indicating that they want to see where a specific marker is. So we'll say selected event, and we'll create the functions changer like so, set selected event. And then this will be, well, will be null to start off with, so it won't have a value. And then the last state we'll say need to re-render markers because user has changed filter option. So the user's changed from the drop down, remember, so say they want to go from wildfires to volcanoes, and we want to reflect that on the map markers. So we will declare it like so, we'll say re-render markers, and then we'll declare the function to change it, and so following the naming convention. Okay, that will also be null, and now we will declare the object, we'll just call it value. This object will be stored on the context provider as its value, and what we'll do, we'll literally just put all of these on there, so it stores every single one. So our children of this context provider functional component will be able to access all of these data if they so desire. Once they've imported our custom hook, the use main context hook. Finally, to get this to actually work, we'll set the return statement like so, and then we'll say main context dot provider, as I said before, and inside will be the children, and its value will be this value object. So we'll say value equals value, and this is done now. So our children will now be the entire application. So we will go back to our index.js and we'll write a new comment so we know that we're working with the main context. We'll say import, and then we'll say from. We haven't imported anything yet, but I'm doing this first just so we can get the auto suggestion correct, and then we'll say main, so what is it called? Context provider, there you go, that one. And then we'll simply wrap our entire application in the context provider, functional component, like so, and then our app will go in there. This is good. Now in our app.js, we will render out this map component, but we haven't created it, so we'll need to, what we'll do, we'll create a new folder and we will call it, we'll call it components. Inside we will create the map.js, and then we'll say React stateless function, we'll create it like so, and now we will simply import this map, so we'll say import map from that location, so slash components slash map, and then we'll just render it out inside this div. We'll actually remove this class name, and then we'll say map self closing, and now we need to customize the map, so we'll go on it. It will have two properties, center and event data, and we will actually assign some default properties to it. So we'll say map.default props, open it up, and we'll say center. The latitude, this will just be a preset value, so I'll set these myself. And then LNG will represent longitude, it's just shorthand obviously. And then we'll just set it to be whatever value you want it to be. Again, you can customize this to your own latitude and longitude preferences. And what we'll need to do, we'll actually need to import the useState hook from React, and inside we will say, we'll create a new state, the first one, and it will be the zoom level that we want the map to be on initially. And I will just set it to be 1. We'll now import some dependencies. We will say import, the first one will be the Google map React, which will be the actual map itself from Google, and that will be from Google map React dependency. And whilst we're at it, we'll also import the use Supercluster Dependency as well. This won't be used immediately though, it's just, we'll just have it there for later use. And we'll also import some more hooks from React because we will need them later on. That will be the use ref and the use effect, like so. Now inside this render, we will say, we'll give this div a class name of map container, and inside we will render out this Google map React component, and that won't be self-closing. Inside we will say bootstrap URL keys. This will need to be the API key inside a object of the field key. So what we're going to do is inside our source we will literally just say new file .env, because remember we installed the .env package. So now we'll go back to our Google Developer Console, and then we will see we'll get our Google API key, and then it'll need to be React underscore app, which is a prefix for all environment variables in React. And then the rest will be, we'll just say Google key, and we'll paste it in like that. Again, we don't have to look at this now, and then we'll just say process.env.react underscore app underscore Google underscore key, like so. And then center will be the property center, and zoom will be zoom. Remember the state, it's in a state because we want to be able to configure it later on when the user interacts with the markers and things like that. So now we actually need to begin the styling now. So the only styling that we'll be using is this index.css file, which imported on the index.js file. And the first thing that we will do, we'll just add some default styling. which is just basic for any CSS project. Box sizing, border box, margin 0, padding 0 for all elements, and a font family, it will be this open sans, but if that doesn't work then we'll just use sans serif like so. Remember, we imported the open sans from Google CDN. Now the body, the background colour will be just this close to white, but it's a grey colour. So F2 3 times, and overflow X, it's the horizontal axis, we'll set that to hidden, because we don't want it to scroll horizontally, which is, it's not good practice for a website really. And then we'll write a new comment, I'll say position relative is important for location info. Again, this will be more clear later on, but all you need to know is this map container will be position relative, and it will have a width 100%, the viewing width of the viewport, height will be fixed value of 600 pixels. So now that we've added some dimension to the map container, which remember is what our map is rendered in, we should be able to start our React project with npm start, and we should be able to see the map on our project all going well. Actually no, we won't, because we will, because we have added the map component in our app, which is good, so hopefully we'll be able to see it. So now that we know this is working, we're going to create a header component just to give more personality to our website. So we'll say new file, we'll say header.js, and we'll create a new stateless function. Again, by the way, that's a VS Code extension. If you don't know how I'm creating these functional components so quickly, it's called React Code Snippets, link will be in the description. And what we'll do, we'll actually import an icon now. So we'll say import icon from, remember the iconify React dependency, not the emoji one. This will give us access to the actual component that we need, and then the actual, for the stylized icon, it will be from that emoji one. So we'll say iconify /icons -emoji one, and then the specific icon will be fire like so. And now we will say return, we'll give this a class name of header bar, and then inside we will have icon, and then this icon property will be fire icon like so, and then after this we'll say extremes, this will be the text, weather event, and then obviously we'll need to style this, so we'll go back to our style sheet, and then we'll say header bar width, we also want that to be 100% the width of the document, and then the background color will be fire brick, which is an appropriate color, the text color white, text align, we want that to be center, padding will be 10 pixels, and then font size we'll say 20 pixels. And now we'll need to add this, so on our app.js above the map we'll add it, so we need to import it first, and then above the map we will just add it like so. So now in our application you refresh, okay, it's not working for some reason, so I'll just press Ctrl+C again to restart, and as you can see it's got it here, this is looking good. Okay, now it's time to add a marker to our app, so we'll create a new component, we'll say new file, we'll call it location marker.js. Again, use the code snippet, so RSF, and this one will have a couple of different properties, so lat and longitude, and I have an on-click listener and an ID. Now it's worth mentioning that we're not actually going to assign any functionalities to this lat and LNG. This is because the actual functionality for these properties come from the Google Map React dependency, so we don't handle it ourselves, but I'm just adding it here to represent that these are properties that this component will have. And we'll need to import, just for save time, we will go to a header actually, and we can close, we don't need to fiddle with this anymore, we'll just copy these two things, because we will also be using them here. And we will also be using some more icons, so we're going to import quite a lot here. We'll import the volcano icon from emoji1, and then that will be /volcano, import that you spell it correctly. And the next one we'll say storm icon from the same place, it's a different icon, so /cloud with lightning and rain, that's what it's called. And then fire icon from emoji1 slash snowflake, sorry, not fire icon, ice icon. Now inside we're actually going to create a new variable, we'll call it a render icon. At the moment it won't have a value, and then we'll say if id equals to 8, we'll set the render icon, we want it to be the fire icon. So this will be a wildfire in this case. If the ID is 8, then this icon represents a wildfire. So this comes from the actual API itself. Again, link in the description for this. You go down, you click on the API here. This is the actual NASA website, and it loads up this here. As you can see, ID of 8 is wildfire, so that's where that comes from. And then else if it's an ID of 10, then we will set it to be storm icon. Else if ID is 12, we'll set the render icon. We want it to be the volcano icon. Else if it's equal to 15, we want it to be the ice icon, so that's one this time. Ice icon, like that. Now in the return statement we will say, we'll give the div the onClick property that has, and then inside we will render the icon and its icon property will be the render icon, whatever icon that will be displaying, and its class name, we will give it a class name of location icon, and of course we will need to style this, so we will target the class like so. Font size will be 2, root in relation to the root size of the browser's default font size, and its position, we want that to be relative. Now inside our map, inside this Google Map React, we're going to add a single marker. Obviously we need to import this actually, so import location marker from where it was, and this will just be a dummy marker, so it won't even be positioned correctly. We're just adding it to give you an example of what the marker will look like. And lat, we'll pass in center.lat, and then for LNG that will be center.lng, and then as for its ID we'll just say 8, so it'll be a wildfire. Now in our application we go to where it is and we refresh, so there's actually a marker here in the latitude and longitude values, which is somewhere in Algeria. So as you can see, obviously it's not positioned, there isn't actually a wildfire here, but again I'm just showing you what the marker is, it's just not positioned correctly. So now you've seen it, we can actually remove it because we don't need it anymore, and we will go to app.js because it's time to use the fetch API to send a request to NASA's API service. So now it's time to go to our app.js, and it's time to actually use the fetch API to send a GET request to the NASA's weather event API or the EONET API. So, and we're going to import React and the useState hook because we need access to this state now, because we're going to create some state variables. And inside, like I said, we will say const, the first one will be this loading state, and we'll set it to be false as its default value, and then below that we'll just write out a new comment, we'll say render event, and that's default value will just be an empty array. And actually, remember I said before that this, on the main context, that this event data state will hold all of the data from the API. Well, it's time to actually implement this, so we write out our comments, we know that we're dealing with the main context, and then we'll say import curly braces because both of the functions on that file are named exports like default. From, obviously it's in the context folder, and then slash context, and we'll use main context, that hook, remember, and then we'll use object destructuring to destruct the values that we need. So we'll say set event data, and the other one is re-render markers, so we'll just copy it here so we don't get the spelling wrong, because if we do then it won't work. So we will extract it like so, and this is good. Now we will use the useEffect hook. Actually, we haven't imported that, so we need to import it. And we will use it inside. Now its dependency will just be an empty array. So this will only be called on component mount. And the first thing that we will do, we will create a method inside, and this will be async. So we can use the await keyword. Yeah, that's not a, sorry, that shouldn't be an argument. That's the async keyword, not an argument. And the first thing that we will do, as soon as this method's called, we will set the loading state, or set it to be true. You'll see why we do this later on. And then we will assign the results of the fetch API to this res constant, and we'll use the await keyword, so the code below won't progress until the fetch API has returned a response. And the endpoint will be this here, again link in the description. And then we'll write a comment, we'll say extract the array contained in the event field. So if you actually look on the API itself, there's this content here, title, description, link, blah blah. We don't want that, we just want this events field, which is an array that contains all the events. So all we'll do is we will say const event equals await res.json. So res is currently a JSON object, and we need to pass that into a regular JavaScript data type. And then once it's done that, we can extract the events field. And then below this we'll say event data is globally accessible, but render event is just to render out the map with the markers. And so what the first thing that we're going to do, the set event data will hold events. Remember I said it would do this. And what we're also going to say, we're also going to store set render events we're also going to store events inside that as well. And once we've done this, we'll set the loading, we'll set it to be false because we've finished loading now. And then we'll also call fetch events. So this user actually calls the method that we just created. And the problem with this is, obviously the user has no idea that this fetch request is even being made. So what we will do is we'll create a loader component, call it loader.js. And by the way, if you're wondering the difference, again, event data is globally accessible between these two states, and set render event is this state will actually change, and it will change to reflect the markers in relation to, say the user wants to filter out all the volcanoes, and the set render event will then change to reflect that, so we'll only render out the markers, the volcano markers. And that's the difference between the two. But let's get onto the loader now. So the user has a visual representation that the fetch request is actually being made, or at least something is loading, they may not know all of that. And this div here, we'll give it a class name of loader container. Inside will be another div, and that will also be, its class name will be loader, and we'll import this in the app.js, and we'll say, actually no, it won't be below main context, it'll be above. We'll just say import loader from components loader. And then obviously loaders are heavily styling at the moment, so we won't see what it looks like, but we'll just add it here. We'll say if loading's false, then if that is true, then we'll show the map. But if loading's true, then we'll show the loader, obviously. That's what makes sense. And inside the loader, no, actually no, we've already written that. We'll just need to do the styling. So the container, we will say loader container. Position will be absolute. Top will be 0. Left will be 0. So that will be in relation to the top left corner of the document, which is its closest position parent, and its display will be flex, so it can center the loader both horizontally and vertically. And its width, we'll set that to be 100%. Height matching 100%. As for the loader itself, this will be a circle, but first we need to set the width and height values. Both will be 100 pixels. And border radius, this is what turns a square into a circle, that will be 50%. The border, again, this loader actually has no colour to it, the only colour will come from the border. Everything else will be completely transparent, and this border will be E6, E6, E6. And the border top colour, so the user can actually see that something's spinning around. That will be contrasting for the reason I just said. And it will have an animation to actually give it some movement. And 1 second, linear, infinite, so it never stops, it just keeps on spinning. And we'll obviously need to create this animation. 0% will be transform, rotate, 0 degrees. And then 100%, you want it to rotate all the way around once, so 360 degrees. And now if you go back on our application, we should refresh and we should be able to see this here. Okay, so I noticed that I actually made a mistake here. So this should be center, not flex. Flex is leaving a value for those. And now if you go back on our application and then we refresh, as you can see, we can see this loader and the fetch API is obviously finished when it disappears. So this is the functionality that we want. Now we'll need to go back to our map.js file, and one thing that I forgot to do actually is we need to render out the member on this map. So I put it here, we need to close the loader now, we don't need to see that anymore. We got this event data property, obviously we'll need to assign some value to it here, so we'll say event data, and that will have the render event state. So currently that will just be all the items from that events array, from the API. And then what we'll do is in the actual map.js file, we will declare an object, and this we'll say index for reference. So this will actually be used as more of an array. You'll see how later on, but I'll call it event data index. And what I'll do is I'll basically create an index of what the event IDs really mean. So 8 means wildfires, 10 means severe storms, 12 is volcanoes, and 15 sea and lake ice. Again, you can look on the API to see where this comes from, but it is accurate. And then below this we'll create a new comment, we'll say create an array of its keys. So the keys are 8, 10, 12, 15, and we need to create an array consisting of just this object's keys, so forgetting these string values. So what we'll do, we'll say let event data index num equals object with capital O dot keys. So this is a method that's built into JavaScript, and we'll pass in the object itself. Now the problem with this is that all the items in this newly created array, event data index num, will be a string, and we want them to be numbers. So what we're going to do is we will use the map method on it, and we'll assign it to itself, and we'll say we'll just cast all the items to a number, and so we'll assign it to itself like so. So now it will reflect this new array. Now as for the clusters feature, what we're going to do is we write a comment and we'll say set up the geo features. Now what a geo feature is, it's essentially an object following a specific format, which I'll show you the format in a second, and this will be used to set up the clusters. So what this supercluster hook will do, it will take in this array that will be generated through using the map function on the event data property, and it will take that in and it will essentially determine whether each item in this array that's about to be created should be a cluster or an individual marker, and that's based on many different variables such as the zoom and something called the bound, which we'll be creating soon, but we'll just do this for now. So we'll create the array that will turn essentially every event from the event data array into a geo feature. So Again, like I said, we use the map method because it actually returns a value. Actually, instead of having parentheses, you want curly braces here because you want to return all of this. So this entire object, and the first field will be type, and that will be feature, like so. Next, we'll say properties, and then this will be an object, and we'll say cluster. This field is very important because it's a boolean, and this boolean will change, so the supercluster hook will change it. So if it's a cluster, this will be set to true, but if it's a marker, then it'll be set to false. And then the event key, we'll just pass in the ID of the event. Again, look at this API if you want to know where these values come from. As you can see, this ID here and this ID here, that's where it comes from. And then the next one, actually none of these values in the properties are necessary to the GeoFeature object, but we're just adding them because we need them in this instance, but they're not consistent with all GeoFeature objects, is what I'm trying to say. And that will be event.title, and then event type, this will be that number. Event categories is an array, and we want to access it, and then ID. So as you can see, it's this thing here. So here, categories, ID, so it's this number, the number that we created the index for, so what it really means. And then after this object, we'll create one more field, and that will be geometry, and this will store the longitude and latitude. Type will be point, and then the second item will be coordinates, and then that will be an array. And the first one will be this coordinate, the first one, which I believe is a longitude, so we extract the longitude first. So we'll say event.geometries, again very important, extremely important actually that this is spelled correctly. And then the one after that will be the latitude, obviously, so we'll just copy this, but we'll extract the second and final item, so that'll be 1, like so. And what we're going to do now is we'll go back and we've got the useRef, so we will create, and we'll say mapRef equals useRef, like so. And below this useState, what we'll do, we'll say const bounds set bounds equals useState null. Again, that's that bounds that I talked about earlier. And this mapRef, this will be assigned the actual Google Map React JavaScript map, so it will contain the actual map object. And below where we set up the GeoFeatures in the points array, we will use the supercluster now. So we'll add a comment, I'll say get clusters, and then I'll say const use object destructuring clusters, and then supercluster, no capitals there, and then we use the use supercluster hook. And what this will take in, it will take in the point, it will take in the bound. Now what the bound is essentially used to work out whether something should be a cluster or not, because it detects how either concentrated or how spaced apart the markers are, and then it will use that to determine whether it should be a marker or not. And again, it will also take into account the zoom of the map as well, in terms of calculating whether something should be a cluster or not. And the radius, we'll set that to be 75, and the max zoom, we'll set that to be 20. These are good values I've tested out. What you want to do now is we'll go back to our Google Map React component, and we'll add some properties. So the first one, we'll say yes, I want to use Google Map API internals, and this will allow us to, it will basically expose the Google Map object, JavaScript object, for it to be contained inside this mapRef. And it will give us some features on this Google Map React component. And then after that, we'll say on Google API loaded, and this will be a function that gets called when obviously it loads up. So we'll write out the function like that. Now the argument itself will be an object, and we want to get the map field of the object. And what we'll say mapref.current. So that ref that we created above, and we will assign it to the map. So this will give us access to the actual JavaScript Google Map object. And another property that we'll add is the on change. So whenever the user makes changes to the map, what we'll do is, again, it will be another callback, but we will extract two fields from the object that is the callback. Actually, so I just noticed a mistake. It should be like that. Yeah, and then we'll open it up like so, and then what we'll do, we'll say set zoom. So if the user's zoomed in on the map, then we want to change our zoom state to reflect the new zoom of the map, and then we'll say set bounds, and that will also need to update with the map itself. So we'll say bound.northwest.longitude, and then bounds.southeast.latitude, and then bounds.southeast.longitude, and then bounds.northwest.latitude. And these are just the values that help us calculate the bounds. Now this clusters field that the useCluster returns and that we've extracted, this is actually an array. So inside this Google Map React, so below all of this, we will actually use the map method on it because it's an array. And what we'll do, first of all, we're going to extract some values from it. So we'll extract the longitude and latitude, and that will be cluster.geometry.coordinates. Again, if you want to know where these values come from, then look to the geo feature. So geometry.coordinates, and then longitude, latitude in that order. And then after that, we will use object destructuring. We'll say cluster is cluster. So cluster is the actual field name, but we will assign that to a variable called isCluster. And then point count. And then this will come from cluster.properties. And then what we're going to do, we'll say used for icon type. We will const cluster ID, and that will come from cluster.properties.event. Type, this is the reason why we stored this extra field on the geo feature. So this will give us that number that we will use to determine what type of market it will be. And then if is cluster. So if that boolean is set to true, then we need to render out a cluster instead of a marker. But first of all, we're going to change the size of the cluster depending on what the value of the point count is. So we'll say let change size equals math.round point count divided by points.length times by 100, and then we'll write the comment, say it can't exceed 40 pixels, and then we'll say let add size equals math.min, so it returns the lowest value of its arguments, so change size times 10. And the maximum it can be is 40, so if change size times 10 is above 40, then it will just return 40. And then we'll actually return the JSX components now. And we'll just say section, we're not going to create a component because there's no point really. And it will have the latitude, like so, that we extracted, and LNG. Longitude, so the cluster will be positioned correctly through that. And it'll also have a key as well. We'll say that would just be cluster ID. Or components rendered through a map should have a key to prevent errors. And then as for the cluster itself, it will be a div, and it will have a class name of cluster marker. And then it will have its own inline styling so it can be styled in relation to its correct size. So the width, we will say add size plus change size plus pixels, like so, and then height will actually be the same. Again, pixels, so it actually has a value to work off of. And then inside it will render out the number of individual markers there are, and that's stored in point count. Now obviously we'll need to style this, so we will go to our style sheet and we'll say cluster marker color white, so the text color is white. The background, we'll set that to be Firebrick, and then the border radius 50%, so it's a circle. Padding will be 10 pixels. Display will be flex, and then we want to center the text to justify content. Center and align items will also be center. So now if we go back to our map and we refresh, as you can see, we can see all of these markers here. Now obviously, no, sorry, clusters, not markers. Now as you can see, and when we zoom in as well, we should, yeah, be able to see them disappearing. Now obviously we can't actually see the individual markers, we can only see clusters. That's because we haven't actually, inside this if statement, we haven't actually created a scenario if the is cluster is false. So below this if statement we will create a new comment. We'll say not a cluster, just a single point, and then we'll say if event data index num, if the index of that, so if that is not equal to -1. In other words, if cluster ID can be found in that array, which remember was comprised of these keys here, and cluster.geometry.coordinates.length, if that is equal to 2, in other words, there is a longitude and latitude values. So these two if statements are just to basically filter out so we don't render out a marker that contains missing data basically. So it's essentially just error handling. Then we will return the location marker, and obviously it'll have the lat and longitude, so it can be in the correct position, and the ID again, that will be the cluster ID, and then key, so obviously that property that all dynamically rendered components need, that will be cluster.properties.event key, like so. And now when we go onto our map, as you can see, they're all here in terms of all the markers. So we got all these, so there's a storm in the ocean, we could see volcanoes, and when we zoom in we could actually see that these clusters filter out to reveal the individual markers hiding below. So this is all good. What we want to do now is actually we'll go to this cluster div here, and we will add in below the style, we're going to add in actual on-click, and this will be a callback function. So we'll open it up like so. So when we click on the clusters, we want to be able to zoom in on the clusters. So the first thing that we're going to do is we'll use the math.min method again, and this supercluster actually that we extracted, it gives us a handy method of working out how much we actually need to zoom in on the cluster to be able to reveal new markers. So we'll use it there, we'll use its method get cluster expansion zoom, and the maximum number of zoom will be 20, and then we'll say map ref, remember it contains the JavaScript object of the actual Google map, and then we'll set the zoom of that to be expansion zoom, and then we don't want it to zoom in on a random point, we want it to actually zoom in on the point where the specific cluster that was clicked on actually is. So we'll say pan2, inside will be an object, and we'll pass in the latitude and longitude of the specific cluster that was clicked on. So now when we go to our application, we refresh here and we click on here, boom, it zooms in. Which one do we click on? Click on this one, it zooms in to reveal these two, and then click on these, it should zoom in to reveal two more, as you can see. And then each level, each different click, it reveals like a new level of markers. As you can see, it doesn't reveal them all at once. And this is all very helpful thanks to that method built onto the supercluster. Now we want it so the user can click on an individual marker, and then some information will appear in regards to the marker that they just clicked on. So we'll actually create a new file inside the components folder, and we'll call it location infobox.js, like so. And we'll create the functional component, and we'll give it a class of location info, and inside will be a h2, we'll say event location info, and then below that will be an ordered list, and then the first list item will be, we'll say ID, and then that will be a strong tag, and then actually this is going to have it's going to have one single property or info, and its value is going to be an object. So because it's an object, we will extract its ID field, and it's also going to have another list item of title, and then its field will be just title, like that. And obviously we'll need to style this, so we'll go to our style sheet, we'll say location info, and its position will be absolute, and that will be offset from the top of the document by 40 pixels, from the right by 50 pixels, and its width itself will be 400 pixels, and its min height, so it can't get any smaller than this, will be 200 pixels, and then padding will be 20 pixels, and the background color we want it to be slightly lucid, so we'll use the RGBA method and 3 zeros to create the back color, and that'll be 0.6 opacity. And the border radius, you don't want it to be a perfect square, so we'll offset its corners by 10 pixels. Font size will be 18 pixels, and then the color, we'll set that to be white. So we want some white text, and then we will style the unordered list inside the location info, and we'll set the list style, we want to remove the bullet point, so we'll set that to be none. And then we'll set the padding to be 0 to remove the default padding, and then we will style the individual list item inside the location info class, and we'll just set its padding, we'll set its padding to be 5 pixels and then 0. And then in the map.js file we will add a new state actually, so we'll write a commentary on what it is, so we'll say const location info, and then set location info equals useState null, like so. And we'll also need to import that location info box component, so we'll import it like so. And then in the render statement below this Google Map React component, so the actual map itself, we'll say if that state holds a value, which it currently doesn't because it's currently set to null, then we will render out the location info box, and its info will be that location info, so remember its info property. And what we'll need to do, we'll need to go to the location marker, so the actual marker itself, and we will add the onClick property to that. So when we click on this, we will set the location info, so we'll set the state, and remember I said it's a object, its ID will be cluster.properties.eventKey, and its title will be cluster.properties.eventTitle. Again, that comes from the geo feature, and we want to actually get rid of that information box when the user interacts with the map. So we are going to add two final more properties onto the Google Map React. The first will be the onClick. So when they onClick, we will set the location info, we'll set that back to null, and we will also do the same, so we'll just copy it because we want to speed things up for the onDrag. So onClick and onDrag are different things. So now when we go to our application, we're going to refresh so we can actually see our changes. Click on this fire. So where is it? It's in Italy, and that's its ID. How about this volcano in Venezuela? Okay, it's not actually in Venezuela. Yeah, it's in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, sorry. Yeah, it's here. Where is it? Okay, well there it is. So it's now time to create the search feature. So we will create a new file, we'll call it search.js, and again we'll use that code snippet to create the functional components. Inside we will import the useRef state hook. I don't know why that index is still open. And then we will create two references. First one will be search box equals useRef, obviously. So we use a hook like that, and then the second one will be option box equals useRef, as always. And then inside the render statement, we'll just change this to be an empty div actually, and then we will create the section element, and that will have a class name. Its class name will be search container, like so. Inside be one single paragraph element, and then that will just say search. And then we want an input, and that will be type text input, and it will also have a ref. Its ref will be the search box that we just created. And before we continue, we'll actually go back to our app.js, and we'll need to import the search so we can actually see it. So it's rendered out somewhere. And then we'll only render it out if loading is set to false. So loading, if that is set to false, then we'll render out search like so. Doesn't have any properties actually. And then we'll need to create a new section, but it won't actually be a section element, it will be a table. So we're using HTML tables, which isn't really something commonly used really, but we'll give it a class name, a search table. And then table row. So these will be the table headers. So the first one will be title, and then this one will be larger than the others because it needs to be. So we'll say style. We use inline styling so it gets the highest order of precedence. Title will be the first table header, and there's 3 columns in total, so you want 2 more table headers. Type, and then the next one, and last one will be location. And that'll be it for now. We need to style this, and what we're going to do, we're going to write a comment so we know what the below code is doing. We'll say font styling for browser compatibility. Whoops. Now forms in HTML, they behave a bit weird in terms of browsers have different styling. They style forms in different ways. So we're going to do the following to essentially strip away all of that default browser styling and get the forms to act in a way that we want it to, and so the styling looks consistent on all browsers. And now once we've done that, we can continue with the actual styling. So we'll say search container, and then we'll style the input, and remember it's type text, so we'll just use the attribute selector like that. And its font family will also be inherit, and its outline will be none, again because some browsers give it an outline when we click on it. We want to move that because we want consistency across all browsers. Its width will be 100%, its max width will be 500 pixels, so on smaller screens it will be 100% the width, but it can't exceed 500 pixels. And then margin will be 8 pixels top, 20 pixels right, 0 bottom, 0 left, and padding will be 0, 0, 0, but it will have some padding on the left of 10 pixels. And now for the search table, margin will be 0 vertical, but horizontal your auto, so it'll be centered. And its table layout, you want it to be fixed. So we don't want its width, the table width, to be changing all the time because that looks inconsistent. Its table collapse, we want single borders, so we'll say collapse, and border collapse. And then its width will be the same, 100%, but it'll be a bit wider in terms of the max width, so it can't exceed 1000 pixels. And text align, we want that to be left, and we will style the table headers inside the search table, and we will set the background color of that to be fire brick, and the text color inside the table, we'll set that to be white. And then we will style the table rows and This will be every even child of the table. So we will style it like that, and we will set the background. As I said, background color will be 6C, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, as you can see. And finally, we will say search table header, and every table header and table data, we'll set the padding of that to be 10 pixels all around. So now what we need to do, we need to go back to our search, and we will import the global context actually. And just so you can get a feel, whoops, is that actually what it looks like? Okay, so clearly I haven't styled something correctly. Oh yeah, that's because I haven't styled the search container, sorry. Completely forgot to do that. So we'll style the search container. To margin, we'll say 10, 0, 20, 0. Display will be flex. Text align will be center. And then we will style all the elements inside the search container. So we'll use the direct child selector like so, and then we'll set the display to be inline. Where is it? Inline block, and then we will style the paragraph inside the search container, and then we will set its margin with 0, 20 pixels, 0, 20 pixels, and then we'll say the font size. That will be 40 pixels. And then if we go back on our document, why isn't it? Okay, is it still not? Okay, so it's still not. So this needs to be justify content center to actually get this to be centered. Yeah, and now as you can see, finally, sorry, I got it to work. It's styled correctly. So what we need to do now is we will go back to our search.js, and then we will import the global context. So we need to go up the level of the hierarchy, it's a context. And then we will say use main context, and then we will extract the following data. We'll say event data, set selection, event, set re-render markers. Whoops, I spelled that wrong, so we'll just go, you know what, set re-render markers. We'll just copy it, it needs to be correctly anyway, so we don't want any chance of that being spelled incorrectly. And also we'll create a state as well. We will say matching result, and then we'll say const match event, and then we'll say set match event equals use state. Okay, we had actually imported use state. Oh, there we have. And that will be event data, remember, from the global context. So it contains, this is how we get access to all of the data from the API. And what we'll do now is we will actually create a method. This method will be assigned to onKeyUp, event handler, event property. This is the event handler itself. On the input, on the text input, it takes in 2 arguments, search query and event data. And the first thing that we'll do, we'll say let event match equals just an empty array, and then we'll say if search query dot length is greater than 0 and event data has a value, then we will loop through event data. And then we'll say let event title equals event data, set each item in event data, and then we'll say title dot 2 lowercase. The reason why 2 lowercase is because we're about to match it up with the search query, and the search query will also be 2 lowercase. So as I said before, we'll say if event title dot index of and search query is not equal to -1. So in other words, if search query can be found inside of event title, we'll say event match to that empty array, push event data event. So we will push that item into this event match empty array. So it will hold. So at the end of this loop, event match will hold all of the events that match up with the search query, essentially. Now after the for loop, but still inside this main if loop, we'll add a comment to say if they have typed in something but it didn't match. So search query.length, they have typed in something but it didn't match. So we'll say if event match.length equals 0. So if there's no, if it doesn't contain anything, basically that array, we'll say event match, and then we'll just set it to be the array to hold one object, no results, and then yes, the two fields are title and categories, and title will be an array in itself, and then it will say title, like an empty string like that. And then the reason why it's formatted is because we're copying the format from the NASA Events API. And then we will set the match event, so we will store the event match inside of this state. But else, if this parent if statement isn't true, then obviously they haven't even typed anything. So they've clearly just deleted all the text. So what we'll do is we will the set match event. At the moment, that will just be set to nothing. So now we will go to the input type text, and we will add that on key up. So when they've released the key, we'll say on key up, like so. Now we call back, we want to open up, and then we'll say let search query, and that will be search box. So this, the reference to this, and then that'll be current dot value, so whatever the user's typed into it, and then that'll be 2 lowercase. So remember, the reason why event data was 2 lowercase, so it can match up. So in terms, capital letters aren't really evaluated in terms of the search query, and then we say want to wait for the user to finish typing before sending method, and then we will use a set timeout function. The reason, so this will be 300 milliseconds, so this user search method will only be called if the user hasn't typed in anything new in 300 seconds. So this is simply to allow some breather space in terms of what this table is rendering out. So we don't want the height of the table to be changing all the time, because that will just look too distracting. So that's the reason why we wait for 300 seconds and 0.3 of a second. So if search query is still equal to searchbox.current, or just copy this actually, because I know this video is already too long already. I know pretty much all my videos are recently, but it's because I'm getting into more advanced areas. And then we'll pass in the search query, the variable that we just created, and the event data, which remember is from the global context. And then we'll obviously render out these matching data on the event. So what we'll say inside the table, sorry, not the event, I don't know. So we'll say match event dot map, and then we'll just EV for short, and then we'll say return table row. This entire thing will be in a table row. A table row will have a key, so we'll just say ev.id, and it will have 3 table data elements, and this one will say ev.title, and we'll just copy them twice more. The second one will say ev.categories, and then 0 to access the array, and then we'll say .title. And then as for the last one, what we're going to do actually, we will wrap this in curly braces, and then we'll say if this holds a value, then we will render out the following. It will be an A tag, so we'll get rid of this actually, and inside the A tag we'll say click here, and href will just be a hashtag like so, so it doesn't actually go anywhere. And then obviously if that isn't the case, then we'll just render out table data but no content inside. So the reason why we do this is because obviously with no matching results, we got no results. So if this isn't equal to anything, because it's just an empty string, then we'll just say, then we won't render out click here because there's no results, so it won't actually lead to anywhere. So as you can see, we've got all this now. We'll just say Italy, which is my go-to. Yeah, as you can see, it's working, which is what we want. And then obviously, okay, well that's not Yeah, the reason being is because, yeah, that's the reason. So we'll sort this out later, but for now, we will just say event data is because we set it to be an empty array. Again, this will all be changed later on anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But what we'll do now is we want to do, when the user clicks on here, we'll actually go to the place, the marker on the map. So the set selected event has been imported from the global context, and when the user clicks on this A tag here, so we'll open this up and we'll say on click, and then in the on click it'll be a callback, and then we will set selected event. Inside we'll pass in the event itself. So now the set selected event, or where is it on the context? The selected event, now that we actually have a value, so it won't be null anymore. So what we're going to do, we'll go back to our map.js and we will actually import the global context. So it's up and then, yeah, like so, and then use main context, and then we will extract it like so. We'll just say const selected event equals use main context, and then below all of this we will create a use effect hook, and then this dependency selected event will be its dependency. So this hook will be called whenever the selected event gets changed. Obviously we don't want it to be called straight away, so inside we'll say if selected event is not equal to null, which it is on component initialization. So now the code inside the if block will only be called whenever they actually click on an A tag, and not just when this component is created for the first time. And then we'll use object restructuring to extract the longitude and latitude. So we'll say longitude and then latitude because that comes first, and then selected event dot geometries extract, and then coordinate, and then yeah, so we extract longitude and latitude from there, and then we say mapref dot current dot pan to, and then lat will be the latitude obviously, and then the lng will be the longitude like so, and then as for the zoom we'll say mapref dot current dot set zoom, and that'll be 10. So now we go to our application, we click on one of these, and then okay, it's not working. The reason being is because this set selected event, the problem with it is, yeah, so this actually doesn't exist. So it's not set selection event, it's set selected event. So now we refresh our application, so we click on one of these, okay, and it's still not working. Problem is it's actually coordinates, that's where we extract the values from, and now when we refresh. So, and also we click on one of these. As you can see, we actually go to the place now. Okay, so we want to go to this G2020 file. Where is that? Because it's not very descriptive, unfortunately. And then, okay, so it's in the United States, just off the Mexico border. Now we want to give the user the option to filter the search results by the event type. So whether it's a wildfire or a volcano, etc. So go back to the search and we will create one more state. It will be, we'll say handle drop down, and we'll say const store selection, and then set store selection equals use state. And at the moment that'll be set to all because that will be the default option of the select element which we are going to create. It will be the first element actually in the return statement. So we'll say section first of all, and then it'll have class name of option container. Inside we'll have a paragraph, and that will be type, and then below that will be the select element, and that will contain options. But as for that will have the ref option box, which is the other ref that we created. If you remember, it's quite a while ago to be fair. But what we'll do, we'll also give it an on change. So whenever we change from the option, that will be, whoops, there's a lot of red lines there. and then we will say set store selection. We'll pass in the option box, so the ref that it's assigned to, .current.value. So the set store selection, this comes from that state that we just created, and in terms of what value it will be assigned, well, we'll create the option elements right now. This will be all, and the value will be all, which is currently the value of the state. And so the value of the option box will relate to whatever option they've clicked on, and then its value property here, that's where it will get its value from. And then we'll create some more here. This one will be wildfires. Make sure the spelling of this is correct, otherwise it won't work, it's just going to mess up. And severe storms, again I was just making sure that I got the spelling right, and it needs to be matching as well. We'll create, I think there's 2 more to create, 2 more option tags, so we will paste them. And then volcanoes, again very important, spelled correctly. And then sea and lake ice, spelled like that. Okay, that's good. Again, we'll need to style this. This is the last styling, you'll be glad to hear. So option, container, display, we'll say display flex, justify content, center, margin, top, 20 pixels. And then as for the paragraph, option container, the paragraph inside the option container, and then whoops, that will be margin right. We'll set that to be 20 pixels. So now we will see what this looks like. We'll just go, as you can, oh wait, we already saw it anyway. So as you can see, this is what it looks like. It's pretty nuanced. So we go back to our application, go back to the search, and we are going to create a new method called filter event data, and that will have, obviously it'll be a method with an argument of event data, and actually we're going to write a comment. You know what it is, we'll say filter event data, and inside we will say spread operator, so we don't overwrite reference data. So what we're going to do, we'll say filtered event data equals event data spread operator. So arrays in JavaScript are reference type objects, which means that if we just set filter event data to event data without using spread operator, then we won't actually copy a new array. Filter event array data wouldn't be its own array, it would just be a reference to event data. So any modifications to this would simply modify this argument array, and we don't want that. We want filter event data to be its own new array. So then we will say if store selection is not equal to all, then we need to filter out. So obviously it's equal to all, then we don't filter out anything, but if it is, then we need to filter out events. And so what we'll do is use the filter method, which it's apt obviously, and we'll say event.categories and then title, if that is equal to store selection, remember that state that gets changed here. And then so filter event data will now be filtered out, and then we'll say return filtered event data, and now we'll need to actually modify our user search event handler. So first of all, we will say let filtered event data equals filter event data, so that method, and we'll pass in event data. Okay, it was used before it was defined, which isn't good, so we're actually gonna paste it there. Okay, and the reason why this isn't working is because it needs to be a different name as the actual method call. So we'll call it filtered event data, and then from that we'll also make some changes. So we loop through the filtered event data instead of just the normal event data, and then we'll also push that to the event match, and we'll also set match events. So if they haven't actually inputted any data, so if their search query.length is 0, then we will merely render out the filtered event data, which is just the event data passed into the filtered event data on its own. So now we want to call this user search method every time this set store selection state is changed. So we will use the use effect hook if I've imported it. It looks like I have. And the dependency will be store selection, so whenever it's changed, this useEffect hook will be called. So we'll say they have changed the filter option. We want the markers to change as well. And then inside the useEffect, we will say first we want to sort out the markers. So this will change the markers, and we'll say let filtered event data, let's make sure it's spelled correctly this time, equals filter event data, the method, and what we'll pass in event data. And then we'll say set render markers, filter event data. Sorry, filtered, so the actual method itself, sorry, a variable that I just created. And then after that, we will say now we want to sort out the search results, and then we'll say user search. So this is that method. We'll pass in the search box dot current dot value, and remember 2 lowercase, so it matches up with the event title, which is also 2 lowercase, and then filtered event data will be the second argument. I don't know. Yeah, so I just completely spelled that wrong. And then the final thing would be to go back to the app.js file, and what we'll do is we'll need to re-render this render event state every time this re-render markers is changed. Remember, it's on the global state, and the re-render markers it gets changed in this useEffect hook here. So we use the useEffect, which we imported at the start, I believe. And again, the dependency from the global state, re-render markers, and then we'll say if. So we only want this to be called. We don't want the contents of this useEffect hook to be activated on component mount. We only want it to be activated when the user actually changes the select element option. And what we'll simply say set render event re-render markers, like so. And now if we go back to application and we type in Italy and we say wildfires only, well, okay, so here's the wildfires on the map. In terms of the Italy wildfire, we click on it. Obviously, I mean, it's obvious where it is, but you know, if we want to go to severe storms, okay, there's no actual results for that. There's no storms in Italy, but there are 2 volcanoes. So we will say, you know, where's this one? Etna, well, okay, we all know where that is, but this one, okay, so this is just on some island somewhere. And yeah, so this is the app. Obviously, you can go back to all this search is working fine. As you can see, we delete all that, and now all the results are here. And this is the app. I mean, if you have any questions, I know this video was long and I apologise for that, but this is quite a feature-rich application. It's more feature-rich than other people's applications who have done similar sorts of things using maps in their web projects. And so there's the reason for the length of this video. If you have any comments, then please post them in the comments box below. I'd love to hear back from you, and I would answer any of your questions. And please like and subscribe. You'll be doing me a huge favour if you did that. And I hope you have a great day. I hope you enjoyed this video, and peace out.